Times have we heard President Trump say how nice it would be if the U.S. and Russia could get along better and cooperate on important issues. Well, one idea he and Vladimir Putin came out of their face-to-face meeting, the first one they had, it caused many incredulous Republicans to say, is this a joke? When he woke up Sunday morning, President Trump tweeted that he and the Russian president discussed forming, quote, an impenetrable cybersecurity unit so that election hacking and many other negative things will be guarded. Well, members of Congress and others who've worked in the government were practically speechless.
This is like the guy who robbed your house proposing a working group on burglary.
If that's our best election defense, we might as well just mail our ballot boxes to Moscow. I don't think that's an answer at all.
It's not the dumbest idea I've ever heard, but it's pretty close.
Well, by the end of the day yesterday, the president sent another tweet which suggested he heard that criticism loud and clear, and he did something uncharacteristic for Trump. He backed off the idea, saying, quote, the fact that President Putin and I discussed a cybersecurity unit doesn't mean I think it can happen. It can't. But a ceasefire can and did. He talked about referring to Syria. Now, take a listen to what the vice president just said a few moments ago on this.
The president raised the issue of cybersecurity again in the context of that meeting. I don't know the exact reference, but the president made it very clear last night that it probably isn't going to work out.
And scene. I mean, 24 hours. It does a full circle. And before Dan, I want to ask you about this, but before I do, I just want to put up another tweet that came out yesterday from Marco Rubio, which was also kind of priceless. He said, partnering with Putin on a cybersecurity unit is akin to partnering with Assad on a chemical weapons unit. Ouch.
I mean, the mocking of this idea was extraordinary yesterday, and particularly from Republicans as well as Democrats. Right. How this got raised, why this got raised, why anybody around the president thought this was a good idea or something that should be talked about publicly after the meeting is baffling, I think, to everybody. I mean, I think that Secretary Carter was correct. I mean, the idea that we are going to go in partnership with the Russians on cybersecurity to protect the integrity of our elections is fanciful. And, you know, the president left his Secretary of Treasury hung out to dry, right, who had praised it on one of the Sunday shows, smartly moved away from it quickly. But I think, again, the damage is done. The damage that's left is this question of, is the president how naive is this president to even begin to talk about something?
Well, you mentioned that he left his Treasury Secretary hung out to dry. Also, his U.S. ambassador to the UN. I spoke with Nikki Haley on Sunday. Listen to what she said about it.
From a cyber standpoint, we need to get together with Russia. We need to tell them, you know, what we think should happen, shouldn't happen. And if we talk to them about it, hopefully we can cut this out and get them to stop. It doesn't mean we ever take our eyes off of the ball. It doesn't mean we ever trust Russia. We can't trust Russia, and we won't ever trust Russia. But you keep those that you don't trust closer so that you can always keep an eye on them and keep them in check.
That was actually a pretty good point, probably the best defense I heard of it. But Margaret, with your perch covering the White House, is it your sense that this was kind of a Vladimir Putin idea, kind of a I mean, that's what people who are experts on Russia are saying, classic, Russian idea to propose working on something that is controversial between two nations?
So this meeting between the president and Vladimir Putin was supposed to go over 30 minutes overseas in Hamburg on the sidelines of the G20. And as we all know now, it went for 2 hours and 15 minutes. And the difference between what you can do in 30 minutes and what you can do in 2 hours and 15 minutes is this. It's exactly this. And when you have a 2.5-hour meeting with multiple staff who can talk about multiple things, it's a different dynamic than what you have is a meeting where the only people who are there are the president, Secretary of State, and 2 translators. No professional note takers, national security advisor isn't there, the Russia director is not there. And so there's an enormous amount that we still don't know about precisely how that conversation went down. And that we won't know. No one's, I mean, it's a private meeting. But that's what matters. And for President Putin, there's a lot to be gained from saying, look, let's move forward. And cyber is something that affects all of us. Because what an approach like that does is it puts us on an equal playing field. The U.S. is worried about this. Russia is worried about this. We're all worried about this. Where what's happening inside the U.S. from Congress, from members of the intelligence community, is a real concern that the U.S., whether it's in states or at the federal level, is extremely vulnerable to Russian penetration, and that Russia needs to be on guard, on notice that there'll be major consequences if something like this happens
and
again.
Concern among, again, many of the president's fellow Republicans that he got played by Vladimir Putin. Listen to what Lindsey Graham said yesterday.
He understands the world pretty damn well, except for Russia. Mr. President, you're hurting your ability to govern this nation by forgiving and forgetting and empowering. The more he talks about this in terms of not being sure, the more he throws our intelligence communities under the bus, the more he's willing to forgive and forget Putin, the more suspicion. And I think it's going to dog his presidency until he breaks this cycle.
You run around those hallways and you talk to these guys every single day, and you witness the fact that it's dogging his president.
Yeah, absolutely, because almost everyone in his party takes a much harder line on Russia than the president of the United States does, particularly not just someone like Lindsey Graham, which is probably one reason why the president felt like he had to back off the cybersecurity idea, because the more that he kept this out there, the more it was undoubtedly going to get panned. But it's interesting. Going back to what the clips you were showing earlier of Nikki Haley, and you mentioned Steve Mnuchin, going out and touting this idea, defending this idea, and the president later saying, no, forget about it. It just shows how much he continues to undercut his own surrogates when they're trying to defend controversial ideas or just completely contradict what they're saying. Rex Tillerson came out of that meeting last week and said they did discuss the issue of sanctions. Afterwards, the president tweeted, no sanctions were discussed. So it's really difficult for these officials to not just defend the president, but, especially when he's taking these.
Although I heard that sanctions issue to be one of imprecision. I read it for the president. What I took away was that the president was saying they didn't discuss the idea of relaxing sanctions. But you're right.
It'd be helpful if he actually answered the question.
The imprecision of the language creates this idea of a contradiction.
Before we go to break, I will note that Vladimir Putin did a press conference to answer questions about what happened, and the United States president did not. We'll leave it there. Coming up, the Senate returns to work today, facing an Obamacare repeal and replace bill still in flux, and new pressure from the president to get it passed before the August recess. Can Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell deliver a signature GOP campaign promise? Stay with us.